expand on it.
Okay, no
So
problem.
basically, on a recent stream, I don't want to mention the stream, but most of you might actually know what stream I'm talking about. The issue of Maria the Copt, or also known as Maria Al-Qibtiyya, radhiyallahu anha, was discussed, right? And a Muslim brother, I think, he came up with this question that why was she not freed by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him? So while I understand the way the brothers dealt with it, right, and I understand the brothers' perspective, however, I would have addressed it differently for several reasons, right? Now, this is not a criticism of them or anybody that might deal with it that way, right? But rather a varying opinion on at least I can speak for myself, or a varying opinion on my behalf, right? Especially against those Islamophobes that might clip that video out of its context, right? And title it something like, "Oh, Muslims can't justify slavery or concubinage in Islam," or something like that, right? So it is important that we actually shed some light on it, right? And as Muslims, of course, we believe that the ultimate source of morality is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It's an objective morality we believe in. We don't believe in a subjective morality, right? And we take pride in Islam being a rational and spiritually fulfilling religion. However, the issue of slavery can be explained rationally, unlike matters of the ilm al-ghaib, or the unseen, knowledge, right? Like, for instance, stuff like how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does certain things, right? The knowledge of the unseen, like angels or jinns or Yawm al Qiyamah, the day of judgment, etc., right? Now, slavery has been a common social issue throughout the history of mankind, right? Present in every ancient culture. Like Islam came during a time with numerous social issues, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided a gradual, what's the word, a mechanism to address them, right? Certain things had to be rooted out immediately, like idolatry, right? Other things that had to be rooted out over time, you know? So, and today we often view issues through secular lens, while because we live in a secular society, while Islam does not need to succumb to secular social pressures, I believe. But certain practices like slavery are now universally considered immoral. And they've always been considered universally immoral in one way or another, depending on the context, of course, right? Um, Islam encourages the freeing of slaves as a means for expiation of sins and as zakat, right? In an Islamic society. So, or Islamic state, showing it was never meant to be a permanent state, right? We will talk about like the types of slavery before I get to the actual issue, so people understand, these caveats there, these underlying details in there as well, right? Um, so the reason why I wanted to address this within this stream is, like, when we have young brothers and sisters, especially, it doesn't have to be necessarily young. It could be of any age, right? Especially living in a Western society, right? Asking these moral questions, we have to remember that as important as it is to point out to them, to ask the right questions about Islam, right? So they don't create unnecessary shubhat in the minds of other people, right? Um, I think there needs to be a mechanism as to how we bring about that change as well, right? We should show them ways how to strengthen their iman. We should, at the same time, I feel there's a dire necessity or dire need, especially more now than ever, right? Living in 2024 and in a crazy world, that we guide them ourselves, or at least guide them preferably through the ulama, guide them to some ulama, some mosque or somebody, to counsel them, right? But at the same time, address the issues at hand, because I don't think this is such a difficult issue to deal with, right? So many dawah channels have dealt with it, right? But certain people, they may not understand it from that aspect, right? um, so because like just saying, hey, you need to ask the right questions, I think it's not enough, right? You have to steer them in the right direction, right? But like guide them to learn how to drive a car first, instead of just saying, hey, just go on this particular direction, right? So before we get to the meat of the matter, and before me just waffling on and on, right? Let's elaborate on the types of slavery throughout history of mankind, right? And especially during the pre-Islamic era, right? Now, there were mainly like slavery could be categorized into three different types, right? Taking a free person and enslaving them, right? You could kidnap somebody or attack a tribe or whatever, right? Now, this is clearly forbidden in Islam. This was from the get go when Islam came, forbade it from day one, right? There is a clear hadith Qudsi, right? Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself says that if someone takes a free person, a man or a woman, right, and makes him or her a slave, he will be against them on the day of judgment. Like he himself will confront them on the day of judgment, right? A second type of slavery or slaves was through a person's lineage. For instance, if somebody is your slave, now their children that were born, they would also be slaves, right? Now, this was sort of like a gray area in the beginning, and this was forbidden over time in Islam. And there's a lot of hikmah, there's a lot of wisdom behind why Islam did not ban that from day one, right? For instance, the entire economy, and I think we've discussed this on either our stream or I think it was on Ramzi's stream on Dawah or Dunya, right? That the entire economy would have collapsed, because we have to remember that slavery was part of every single ancient culture, be it the Mesopotamian or the Aztecs or the Chinese or the Greco-Roman, the Egyptians, you name it. All ancient, like up until 100 years ago, it was part of most countries, including all the Western countries, be it Europe, United States, everywhere, right? The very country that I live in, Brazil, right? So um, now, why is it that Islam did not ban it from day one? Okay, the slavery through lineage, a person's lineage, right? Now, um, so as I said, like the economy dependent on slavery. So just saying, hey, stop slavery from day one, it would have like created many problems, and we can clearly see that with a depressive class that actually started to take place after Abraham Lincoln, when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation in the US, right? Even though those black slaves were free overnight, um, but it took so long for those people to be accepted in the society, which gave rise to what is known as the depressive class.
Okay,
And
if
go
if
ahead.
I if I can if I can answer that as well. So, and even if we talk about exactly why, well, I don't know for much people that live in the States, but um, at that time in the 18 or in the early 1860s, the Emancipation Proclamation was given. So at the time, the Civil War was going on, where the southern states were um, seceded from the Union or seceded from the rest of the states. So it's basically North versus the South. Abraham Lincoln was president of president of the United States and the North, whereas the South became their own quote unquote nation. So the whole idea of the Emancipation Proclamation came as because the main reason why the Civil War was fought was in due part of slavery. Why was that the main reason? Just like what Fawad is talking about, it's because for the South, their main export, their main marketplace is slavery and cotton. So how do the idea of working in the cotton plantation and stuff like that? That's how the southern states like Texas, Tennessee, that's how they made their money. So they sought this removal of slavery as not only as a problem with a separation of races, like we know, Caucasians or white and black, but they also saw it as, oh, you're trying to take money out of my pocket. So it was a double issue. And the reason that, before I join on, the main reason why Abraham Lincoln actually signed it was not because he actually saw, the separation of classes, white and black people as a moral issue. The main reason why he actually signed the declaration was so other countries did not get involved in the war. So at that time, the southern states, the Confederates, wanted countries like Germany or France. They were actually looking at other countries to come and aid them in the war. The reason why Abraham Lincoln signed it was because at that time he turned the whole issue of the war from a political or a financial war or financial issue into a morality and ethics issue. So the reason why he made it all about slavery was so he can keep those other countries away, because those other countries did not want to touch this war if it's all about morals. But if it was about politics, then they didn't mind. So even as we can see there, the whole issue of what happened to actually force it, you can even see even with the president, it he had no choice but to do that, because for so long he was president for about, for like almost about 2 years, and he still did not want to ban slavery, because he himself said the way you defeat slavery is to contain it first before you let it suffocate over time, which is why he, even when he became president, he actually did tell the South, I'm not going to take away your slaves at that time. So we can see, even from a modern, or 200 years ago, from a modern viewpoint, this idea of just eliminating it as a whole gives the threat of eliminating it actually gives credence to war, because if anybody that makes money off of it feels threatened, they will actually fight and say, no, you're trying to take away my living, my money, etc., etc. So we can see a whole war that took 5 years came into place just for the threat of removing slavery. So, and this is one of the reasons why, one of the best examples why you don't take it away immediately, because you can see it crumbles certain people and it leads to violence. But sorry, go ahead.
No, Jazakallah khair. That was great insight. Um, you know, so like as I was saying, and this is why racism continued in the United States, right? Because certain things you cannot just change them overnight. You have to have a mechanism as to how you're going to pluck it out of the system, right? So when the racism continued, because those people didn't feel like they belonged in the society, right? They couldn't feed themselves, right? They couldn't clothe themselves, they had no shelter, and the government was actually not ready to take them on, provide them with any social welfare, right? So, and people as well, they were not going to treat them as equals, right? Now, while Islam took care of this by encouraging religiously to free the slaves, made it possible for those people to buy their freedom from their masters, and then systematically gave them an opportunity to be incorporated to become part of the society. And a lot of these people even became our top scholars and even rulers, right? Now, the third kind is the prisoners of war, also known as the Milk al Yamin, right, in Islam. Now, this is the only means through which slavery is allowed in Islam. So, whenever this term slavery comes up, it's a very loaded term, because the Western um, understanding of slavery is very different than the Islamic understanding, right? Now, what are the rights of slaves in Islam? That's something that we've discussed many times, and so many other Dawah channels have discussed them as well, right? And I don't mean to make this, discussion too long, and let people hop on, because it's a religious roundtable, so other brothers they can hop on, right? So I want to zoom into the issue itself, which is about Maria Razial Anha, right? the so-called concubine of uh, Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, that why was she not freed, right? Now, I don't know about you guys, but every single time when I actually study the Sira, and this is one of the reasons why we always recommend people to study the Sira of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Every single time that I study the Sira, I derive different moral lessons out of all of his life, including all of his marriages, right? And each one of them differently. And there are certain things I may have missed at the first go, but then when I read it again, I'm like, aha, I did not, I probably overlooked certain things, right? And as Aisha Razil Anha says in one of the famous hadith, that the Prophet, peace upon him, he was the walking, talking Quran, right? Now, so let's sort of look at the wisdom behind Maria the Copt, or also known as Maria Al-Qibtiyya, right? Now, Maria the Copt was given, Raziel Anha, she was given to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as a gift by the Egyptian ruler. I think his name, if somebody remembers in the chat, but if I'm not mistaken, Muqawqis or something like that, right? Now, this
Caucus,
was sorry,
Muqawqis.
Muqawqis. Yeah, there you go. So now this was in response to a letter that the Prophet, peace upon him, sent him, inviting him to Islam, right? Now, she was already a slave girl. I think she and one of her sisters, they were sent together, and they were very beautiful, right? So one thing that we have to remember is that she was already a slave that was sent to the Prophet, peace be upon him, as a gift. She was not enslaved by Muslims. Okay. Now, of course, some people may ask, well, okay, but she was sent to the to Prophet, peace upon him. Why didn't the Muslims, free her? Why didn't the Prophet, peace upon him, free her? Why did he decide to keep her? Now, the answer is it requires quite a bit of detail, but I'll stick to some of the main points that I was thinking about. Right now, imagine if the Prophet, peace upon him, had freed her. Um, First point, where would she have gone? You know, if he had sent her back to the ruler, the Egyptian ruler, Makakis, it could have been, it could have borne several problems. First, the Egyptian ruler might have felt his gift was unappreciated, right? And it was customary at the time not to return gifts. Till this day, believe it or not, in most Eastern cultures, like in my culture, if you don't accept gifts, in the Iranian culture, I know this for a fact, in Afghanistan as
Yep,
well, right?
yep.
If you actually don't accept gifts, and Ali, you can tell me about, like, back home with you, like in Africa, is it the same thing?
Oh no, it's not only is it the same thing, but even if you go to someone's house, if you go to someone's house and they offer you food and you say no, immediate disrespect. Immediate.
There you go.
Even if
Yeah.
even if you're full, you accept that, you accept what they're offering you immediately. So there's a key principle when it comes to accepting gifts, especially if you're at someone's home. If it's someone who's going out of their way to make something for you or to give you something, you accept it at all times. It's extremely disrespectful.
I remember my dad. He actually, yeah, I don't know if it was like, it's like a very special type of seed, or something that he found, and then he went to the mosque and he gifted it to the imam of the mosque, and also gave it to this one other guy that used to be, that used to offer salah in the front row with him together, right? And that guy actually refused to take it. My dad actually felt really insulted, and he was like so angry about it. So we're trying to calm him down. The imam was also telling my dad, it's like, it's okay, but just, yeah, in certain cultures, it's just considered disrespect, right? Now, another point is sending Maria Raziel Anha back would have subjected her to continue to be part of a culture that where she most probably was already mistreated, because remember, she was a slave over there, right? Now, Islam grants slaves far better rights than any other society in the entire history of mankind. It's far better than any um, you know uh, recent prison systems that you have, be it, with all of the Geneva Convention and everything that they follow, because Islam gives you an opportunity to, first of all, buy your freedom, and gives you an opportunity to be part of the society. You wear the same clothes that your master is wearing. You're fed with the same clothes. um, your master is wearing. In Islam, you're not even allowed to call them by slaves. You're allowed, you're not allowed to hit them. If you hit them, you're supposed to set them free, etc., etc. Right now, therefore, if Maria, radiallahu anha, she had stayed with the Prophet peace be upon him, he knew that Islam treated slaves, both women and men, much better than any other ancient society out there. So the best option was to keep her unless she desired freedom, right? And which is what we refer to as kitaba. I will speak about that. So Islam has a mechanism for these slaves to be freed if they want to buy their freedom, right? Now, another point is in Islam, oh yeah, okay. So let's actually get to the kitaba part because it is mentioned in the Quran in chapter 24, verse 33, right? So it instructs Muslims to abide by the kitaba, and we can actually, Brother Ali, if you can bring up that particular verse, it's chapter 24, verse 33. Mukataba, yeah, mukataba. Sorry. Well, I mean, technically, you could call it kitaba as well, but yes, the word used over there is mukataba. Yeah, because like kitaba is like contract, right? So yeah, but jazakallah khair, Brother Elias. Okay, so there you go. Um, so it says over here, Ali, can you read it out loud, please?
Alrighty. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And to those who cannot afford marriage should keep themselves chaste until Allah enriches them out of His grace. And those of your slaves who wish to enter the contract of kitaba or emancipation by paying money, contract kitaba with them if you recognize some good in them and give them out of the wealth of Allah that He has given you. And do not compel your maids to prostitution if they wish to observe chastity in order that you may seek the temporary benefit of the worldly life. If one compels them, then after their being compelled, Allah is most forgiving, very merciful.
Jazakallah khair. So as you guys can see, it says over there that those slaves that wish to enter into the contract of kitaba, right, the emancipation by paying money, right, and there are different means as to how Islam allows them to do that, right? So now, if the slave cannot afford that price, right? So let's say if I take a slave and that slave wants freedom and they want to be emancipated, I will we can negotiate on a price. But let's say if there's a price that I demand, right? He or she, it applies both to males and females, right? They can ask another Muslim or the Islamic State to help him or her buy their freedom, right? This could be considered part of zakat, right? And we have so many examples of like there's one example of the wife of Prophet Muhammad peace upon him, whom the Prophet peace upon him bought her from another companion after the battle of Hunain, right? And the Prophet peace upon him asked her to marry her, and she agreed, right? Um, so basically, in this case, she would give her consent to stay with him, right? If she is taken as a slave, right? In which case, her consent to stay with him by default would include her consent to have, you know, um, sexual intercourse with that person that she's living with, right? Now, it was a perfect way also for Maria Radiallahu anha, right, to get to know Islam and accept it, rather than sending her back to I think it was like a Christian environment that she came from, right? Yeah, actually she was a Copt, so she must have been a Christian. She was Coptic Christian, right? or wherever she was from, or I don't know. I don't even remember exactly if she herself was a Christian, but I think she was. I know she came from there, and she was referred to as Maria Al-Qibtiyya. So by default, she would be Christian, right? But anyways, and as we know that later she accepted Islam, right? Um, so another thing is that if, like, okay, imagine the Prophet peace upon him had freed her, right? And let her just roam around free in Arabia. Where would she have gone? Who would have fed her? Who would have clothed her? Who would have, given her shelter? Like during those days, there were no, like, central governments to take care of such people, right? And it would have been very possible that she would have been forced towards, like, things like prostitution, or somebody may have kidnapped her, because a lot of women back then, and remember, she was a beautiful woman, right? So a lot of people, they were looking for women like that on the streets, and they used to kidnap her, right? And they used to force them into prostitution. Or some women, they were forced into prostitution because of necessity to survive. Because remember, guys, it's a 6th century Arabia we're talking about, right? It's not like she could have walked down the street, like, applied for a job at the local, I don't know, McDonald's or grocery store or something, right, for a minimum wage. Therefore, the best case scenario would have been to stay with somebody, and who better than the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, right? Now, the last point that I would add is, because I was thinking of different reasons, like the wisdom behind it, right? The hikmah behind this. So, through the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and this particular incident, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He wanted to, you know, set a standard that the children of slave women are not born as slaves. Rather, they're born free. Because when she bore Ibrahim, her son, to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was obviously free, right? He died in his infancy, but that's besides the point, right? And the woman herself actually gains freedom as well, right? So the moment a slave woman, if you have sexual intercourse with her, your concubine, if she actually she gains, by default, she gains her freedom if she becomes pregnant, right? And obviously, the child is also free, which was not a cultural practice that they used to follow back in the day, you know. So I think that would be it from my side. If you guys want to add something else in there, but these were some of the points that I could think of.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, just because I don't want to dwell too much on this, but the modern day idea of slavery is American slavery. So I just wanted to let you guys know, American slavery is the is the one where they include race. They say, well, we are genetically superior to you because of our, because of race. It's, you were meant to be a slave because you were born into this kind of, this kind of um ethnic group. So a lot of our ideas of what we today, as people living in the modern era, we think about slavery, we think more about American slavery, we think about the quote unquote British slavery. However, slavery, the term itself could be synonymous with servitude. And even back then, even before that, there's this idea of indentured servants, people that not know, it was here in the States. It was also in Russia for a long time. It's called indentured servitude, where you become a servant for some people. Sometimes you be getting wages, other times you're trying to make up for something, or if it's for a significant amount of time, it could be however you're contracted for. So after that, you're free, at least you're supposed to be. So we need to get past this idea that the only slavery that ever existed throughout history is what, the type of quote unquote actions that took place in this country for over 400 years. That's not the case. That's not the case. So just wanted to drop it.
Yeah.
That's that.